This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want to pre-order some Bloomburrow, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Nadu, and today we're concluding the card-by-card set review for Bloomburrow. I've looked at all the cards in the main set so far, except for one, so that mostly just leaves the special guests, but there is that one card I missed in the set review, because for some reason it didn't go up with the rest of the card gallery. It went up a day later, so let's get that card out of the way first, which is Shortbow, which for 2 generic is an uncommon artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance and reach, and it can equip for 1 generic. This is a pretty solid buff for the cost. Vigilance and reach are a nice combination, and getting +1/+1 alongside that for a low equip cost would probably have this at a C in most formats. And this format has Valiant, and this is a cheap, repeatable way to trigger it, so I'm giving it a C+. Alright, let's talk about the special guests now. Before we get into looking at the actual cards, we have to talk about the fact that this set is significantly different from the last few when it comes to the contents of play boosters. Lately, we've had a whole bunch of cards from outside the main set in boosters, but that's not true this time. There's no dedicated bonus sheet slot in the booster, and no real bonus sheet in this set. All there are is 10 special guests, which can appear in one of the common slots or the one card of any rarity slots, and there's a 1.5% chance you see these in your booster. This surprised me a little bit, to be honest. I had thought the animal planeswalkers and or the set's commanders might also show up in these slots, but they don't. So this is going to be a relatively short review video, as we've only got 10 cards to look at. If you're new to my set reviews, I use letter grades to sum up my thoughts in each of these cards. You can find a guide to those letter grades in the description. Alright, let's take a look at Bloomburrow's special guests. First up, we've got Swords to Plowshares, which for 1 white mana is an instant. Exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. This is arguably the best removal spell of all time. While it doesn't always generate a 2-for-1 or something insane like that, although it can since it's an instant and you can cast it in response to stuff, the fact it deals with any creature for a single mana is enough for it to be an A-. And yes, I know, they gain life, but it doesn't matter. What you get for 1 mana is insane, and in a pinch where like a life gain trigger wins you the game, which isn't going to usually be the case, you can get rid of one of your own creatures and gain life. But that's not where the card gets most of its value. Next up, we've got Ledger Shredder, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/3 Bird Advisor with flying. And whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives. This means you draw a card and then discard a card. If you discarded a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. This was great in New Capenna, and it has gone on to be nuts in multiple 60-card formats too. It just triggers way more than you think it will, and connive is an incredibly strong trigger. Remember, it triggers when your opponent casts a second spell too. It's probably even better in this format than it was in Capenna because it has a useful creature type for blue-white and loads the graveyard for blue-black. This is another card that is stupid efficient for what it is, giving it an A-. Next up, it's Rat Colony, which for 1 generic and a black is a 2/1. It gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control, and a deck can have any number of cards named Rat Colony. That's actually always true in Limited, but it's also funny text to see on a special guest in one of your play boosters, because this card is so rare you're never going to have more than one anyway. Well, the first 2 cards were amazing, and this one, not so much. Rat Colony isn't bad, it's just nothing special. It has a decent floor and a decent ceiling. This format has rats in it, so you're never going to feel like it's awful, but you're also never going to feel like you're doing something great. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Relentless Rats, which for 1 generic and 2 black is a 2/2 rat. It gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield named Relentless Rats, and a deck can have any number of cards named Relentless Rats. So this one is even worse because you're not going to have any other Relentless Rats. At least Rat Colony just cares if you have rats. It doesn't have to be other cards with the same name. In this case, it does. That means this is a hard-to-cast 3 mana 2/2, and that's just an F. Next up, it's Kindred Charge, which for 4 generic and 2 red is a sorcery. Choose a creature type. For each creature you control of the chosen type, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those tokens gain haste. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. This has some potential in a format where you're likely to have many creatures with the same type, and if they have enter the battlefield abilities, things can get really interesting, but it's definitely something of a win more card, and it has a pretty dismal floor. I'm going to give it a C. Next up, it's Sylvan Tutor, which for 1 green mana is a sorcery. Search your library for a creature card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. Tutors that don't put the card in your hand, even at 1 mana, are awful and limited. This is because they represent card disadvantage. You pay 1 and go down a card for card selection, which even when the next card is the best creature in your deck, usually isn't worth it, especially in Limited where there's no guarantee the best creature in your deck is anything special. This is an F. Next up, it's Toski, Bearer of Secrets, which for 3 generic and a green is a 1/1 legendary squirrel. It can't be countered, it's indestructible, it attacks each combat if able, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. This was really nice in Kaldheim, and like Ledger Shredder, there's tons of support for its creature type this time around that it didn't have last time. Toski draws you a ton of cards and is very difficult to kill, often generating value for you immediately, should you have any board at all when you play it, giving it a B+. Next up, it's Frogmite, which for 4 generic mana is a 2/2 frog with affinity for artifacts. This format doesn't have an artifact deck or remotely enough artifacts to make this cost low enough for it to be a card you ever want to play. It's an F. Next up, it's Sword of Fire and Ice, which for 3 generic mana is an artifact equipment. The equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from red and blue. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, Sword of Fire and Ice deals 2 damage to any target and you draw a card, and it equips for 2 generic. The Sword of X and X cycle is really strong, and this is in the conversation for the best of the bunch, at least in Limited. This is because it not only, of course, offers a strong buff for the cost and useful protection, it also gives you a combat damage to player trigger that can generate 2 full cards of value. Picking off an X2 and drawing a card, for example, is insane. Any creature this gets put on is a massive threat, even more so if your opponent is playing red or blue. It's a bomb, giving it an A. Lastly, we've got Secluded Courtyard, which is a land. When it enters, you choose a creature type. It can tap for colorless, and you can add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type or activate an ability of a creature source of the chosen type. So even in a set with this much typal stuff going on, the fact that this land can't tap for colored mana for a decent chunk of spells in your deck really limits how good it can be. Not only can it not make colored mana for creatures with the wrong type, but it can't do it for your non-creature spells either. I mean, it is nice it can still tap for mana no matter what, but it's kind of a wash in the end. It helps your mana base some, but it hurts it some too. If you end up in a super creature heavy deck, you'll probably play it, but otherwise it's not going to be worth it. I'm giving it a D. So those are the special guests for Bloomburrow. While the set review is over, there's still a lot of Bloomburrow content that's going to come out, including a top 10 bombs video, an archetype guide, draft videos, and I'll be playing in the early access event in just a few days. So stop by on Twitch if you want to check that out. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to catch all of that future content, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see the rest of this set review, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.